So you have written extensively on the hypocrisy of the global north at events like Davos and the UN COP summits, where these industrialized global north countries attempt to greenwash themselves and push their current and historical responsibilities to tackling the climate crisis onto developing global south nations. Could you explain to us how they do this? Because a lot of people might not be aware of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been something that's essentially been going on since we've started the modern sustainability movement, at least at the international political level, which is usually around like late 1960s, early 1970s, where there's been this tension between the global north countries, the developed countries, for lack of a better word, or if people still use as the first world countries, which we don't use that anymore, but if people don't know any other terms, that term, where they essentially are the ones that kind of got us into this mess, right? You think of the Industrial Revolution and the UK and the United States and a lot of the other countries of Europe are the ones that churned out a lot of this pollution. But when it came to owning up, to doing something about it, to paying for fixing it, which is very expensive, the countries of the North sort of said, oh, well, it's not our responsibility because now in the 1960s and 70s, it's the developing countries that are making the mess. And so they're trying to pawn off the mess that they made historically onto the ones that are making the mess now. Meanwhile, the global South countries are saying, hey, 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 you guys made the mess. We're just doing what you already did. We're trying to develop and to get on par with you so we can compete economically. Yeah, we understand that, yes, we're making a mess too, but where's your role in all of this? What is your responsibility, and how can you contribute to fixing the issue? So there's always been this tension again, particularly around who's going to pay for all of this. And that then leads into kind of how the messaging to the general public is fed out to everybody, where there's a lot of finger pointing of it's this country's fault or it's that country's fault. But I mean, they have really good PR teams in the global north. So they're sort of saying, hey, it's not us, point the finger over there. And the more they point fingers at other countries, particularly larger developing countries like China and India, the less they think people are going to realize that it's actually the developed north that caused a lot of the problems. And as a final point, if you think of sort of the pollution in the atmosphere now, we talk a lot about carbon emissions, and there's historical carbon emissions as well. So a lot of the damage that we're experiencing today, the global warming that we're experiencing because of holes in the atmosphere, that's not because of what's happening today. That's because of what happened during the Industrial Revolution. So it takes a very long time for these impacts to be seen. That's kind of scary because we're doing a lot of damage now that we won't see for another 100 years. But the damage we're seeing today is certainly because of what the industrialized countries did in the past.
Expanding on this further, with the Paris Agreement came out of COP 21 and has been updated since, obviously, though it is a legally binding international treaty on climate change, in theory, it doesn't include military emissions in its calculation, despite the military, in particular, the US military, because it's so massive, being by many estimations one of the world's largest polluters, if not the largest. So this is a clear limitation of agreements like the Paris Agreement. Can you see this being addressed in future international talks, or how do we navigate this type of thing?
I hear the exasperation in your voice, and I agree that it's just you look at this and you go, "Oh my gosh, like we're supposed to be doing so much and nobody's doing anything. Where are we at with all of this?" And I think just the past few days we celebrated the 10th anniversary of the Paris Climate Agreement, which was 2015. But let's play a game. If I had to ask you, I'll turn the tables on you. How many countries are on track to meet their Paris climate targets? How many countries would you say out of the 194 countries in the UN?
So I only know China is, and I actually don't know any other countries, which is more my ignorance, probably.
Oh no, it's not ignorance at all because like we talked about a second ago with this PR machine, these countries are pretending like they're meeting their targets. There are exactly zero countries on track to meet their targets, even after 10 years, even after adjusting the targets over and over again over those 10 years, nobody is on track to meet them. And yes, they were quite aggressive. So I don't think anybody was ever going to actually meet them, but it would be nice to get kind of part of the way there. So the issue with a lot of things, and this is not just the climate agreement, but a lot of things that come out of the UN is they're supposed to be binding, but a lot of times countries just kind of ignore it. And there's no real strong enforcement mechanism, unfortunately, with a lot of the stuff the UN does. This isn't to say the UN's a bad place, but the enforcement is usually lacking, particularly on something like climate, because if you think of how different the world is today versus where it was 10 years ago in 2015, we've had a global pandemic, there are a few major wars going on, there's a genocide happening, there's economic collapse happening all over the world, not to mention, different authoritarian regimes that are taking over in certain countries. Sustainability, climate change, all of those issues that were very important back in 2015 for a lot of these countries, it's fallen to the bottom of the list. So, of everything that the UN should be enforcing, this should absolutely be enforced. But unfortunately, with the countries that run the United Nations, because at the end of the day, it's in their hands, they're worried about many other things. And climate change just doesn't make the list of top 10.
So even my claim that China is on track, that's also incorrect.
There are countries that are doing better than others. So China is one of the countries that is doing better than most, but there are some countries that, for whatever reason, there, a multitude of reasons why, they just really haven't been able to get the traction to get ahead with the goals that they set for themselves. But again, China's doing quite well. Some of the other global north countries are doing well also, but then there are other countries, particularly the petrostates of the world, that have not done very well, which honestly shouldn't be a surprise.
Right, yeah. And like we mentioned, if it doesn't even include the military, then it's like no one's on track,
No,
basically.
absolutely. I mean, once you start to factor in like the real pieces of it, it's going to throw all the numbers off, and it would get very depressing to actually start to look at the real numbers and where we are with that.
Okay, great. But
I
well,
try to stay positive, but sometimes it's hard.
sorry.